Hi, and welcome back to Solutions. We're continuing discussions with Mr. Steinberg Henry. And if you saw the first half of this program, you can see that there was so much to talk about. We didn't even really get to close the show off. And we continue talking, and that's why we're going to be doing a series of interviews with him, because it almost feels like speaking with him, there's never a new topic. It's just going on and on and on and on. Welcome back again,
Thank
Steinberg.
you very much. Nice to be with you, Kathy.
You know, what can I say? Talking with you is just so comfortable, and you have so much to say. One of the last topics that we had touched on was about glaucoma, and Mr. Henry is now going through that experience. And to backtrack a bit, if in case you didn't see the end of the first program, I just want Steinberg to go through again how did you become aware that this was happening to you? Because I'm sure so many of us are going through it and we don't even know that's what it is.
Well, actually, I was then at the University of Windsor. I went there in 1987, that's in Ontario. And by, you get into a class, you're an undergraduate, 300 students sit in the class, 250, and you're in this huge auditorium. I used to sit halfway, sometimes at the front, sometimes at the back, depending on what time I entered the class. And I could see the board, as I told you. I used to go out to sea as a boy, and I could see the horizon at a distance. But somewhere around 2 years later, whilst at university, I began to observe that I was kind of squinting, kind of looking, something was happening. And I couldn't understand why certain things were escaping my sight. And remember, I had never experienced that before.
Right.
Sometimes I begin to hypothesize that it might have been environmental, and then I went across to some doctors in Windsor, ophthalmologists apparently, and they described the matter as glaucoma. And after that, it was like, well, you have to begin to put this drop, that drop in your eye. And I stayed at Windsor for the next till about 91. That's another 2 years. And so I had to continue to use those various things, would go home. Then I went across to Toronto, to York University, where I was a doctoral candidate. And then I started to visit some other persons in Toronto. And, they said the same thing. And even if I met the specialists, apparently the specialists seem to have been very interested in the picture that they saw in the eye, rather than providing it with any kind of significant medical cure. But then I began to read about the matter, and I began to realize that what they call peripheral vision, in terms of chronic, open-ended or acute glaucoma, and so began to bite. I hope it was not a mind over matter. The fact that somebody told you it was so then those particular symptoms began to manifest themselves.
Right.
But then, of course, some people say that it passes from family to family. My mother actually is 81 years, and she has lost much of her vision, and she was diagnosed as having it. She had 8 of us, and I'm the only one who seemed to have openly taken it on. So it's quite a bit, but that was the time it was observed, and I continued to at least go ahead with my work in the best way that I can. But I like television. For some reason, the symbol of television to me is the eye, and to me, that's the only thing I have. So.
Yeah. Now, when you had returned to Dominica, what was the medical care like? Because I know Dominica has is experiencing difficulty now with medical care.
Actually, there were a group of persons who had just moved back in. There was an excellent optometrist there at the time. And in addition to dealing with the specifics of eye care and probably prescriptions in terms of lenses and glasses, she was a very friendly person and very pleasant to talk with.
Okay.
And one of the things about glaucoma is that there is a psychology to it. There's a certain tension that one feels, especially if you were not born that way, and suddenly you feel this onset of what the National Association for Visually Handicapped here in New York calls the sneak thief. It actually sneaks up and almost steals. You don't even feel it. It's painless,
Right.
except in the real, acute cases where the pain is sudden onset. But in Dominica, I found that there was this optometrist who worked very well. She spoke very well. In fact, I'd be the last person to visit her office, because we would sit and talk and talk and talk about a lot of things. And there's a certain therapy, in good conversation.
Absolutely.
And later on, we had an ophthalmologist who had been trained in France. And she came home, and laser was introduced at a particular point. But I think there is much to be required in terms of the accuracy and the efficiency of those particular approaches. But I must say the same medication in terms of the drop and things that people are using here, like the Cosapt, and so that was available in Dominica.
Okay.
People would use the Timolol and the pilocarpine. These are some of the names of the various things that people use to put into their eye. Those things were very much available. Down to, you know, most of what I have seen that is being used there, I think most of it is available, except, of course, what is so exorbitant that it is not yet reached the mass people, you know. But Dominica generally has been, there are about 8 to 10,000 people who have eye disorders in a 70,000 population.
Wow.
Cataract is a major factor.
Yes, that I know.
And it is, when I left Dominica, actually my wife's, one of my wife's uncles is a professor at Auburn University. And he was in Dominica just before I left to come to New York, and I told him about this particular case because I was interested in making contact with some people at the University of Arizona. And he told me, Stein, this business of this eye problem is rising in the United States. Probably, I don't know if it is as a result of certain dietary patterns, you know. It is believed that some people who are predisposed, there's traces of diabetes within their families. These people tend to be short-sighted in some cases. You know, these people are likely, sometimes even steroid use, which is reported in the research, can make one predisposed to those particular forms, other than the hereditary genetic, you know, family runs in the family kind of explanation that is provided. So yes, much more needs to be done. We probably should begin to tell people more about how they should use the remaining sight. I find a lot of what we do still is more concerned about controlling and managing, rather than saying, okay, you have a problem with 10%. What happens to the remaining 90? People are more concerned about the worry and depression that the 10 they've lost brings, rather than the 90 that they have. How do you continue to use it? And that's one of the things I discovered when I got to New York from the National Association for Visually Handicapped. They said, hey, let me tell you how, and then I was challenging and talking and raising issues with them. But the word cure, it seems to upset a lot of people, specific to glaucoma. Probably we'll talk about that another time.
Yes, we can get more into detail on that. We will.
Yes.
The other thing too is that once you noticed that you had the glaucoma and you were diagnosed with the glaucoma, did you find that the rest of your family needed to get checked, or you know, they just left it as, well, we don't feel we have a problem yet, we're not going to delve into that?
I think it was something we had to look at generally because, for instance, my children specifically, I had to begin to look clearly to make sure that every year they had a medical check, or every, you know, to make sure that they ophthalmologically they were safe. And generally they've been so for over the last 2 or 3 years since. My other brothers and sisters, not that I've heard of cases when one of my sisters has some problems with her eyes. It has not been diagnosed as glaucoma. But I have heard of, there might be cataract cases arising here and there. Some of it is congenital. Some, you know, everything is almost like, I must say, from, you know, after having lived in the United States, you become accustomed to the African. You begin to absorb the African-American jargon. And a lot of what seems to be accompanying black people in terms of disorders and disease seem to be genetic and hereditary. It's almost as if it runs in your family, it runs in your family, it runs in your family, so nothing can be done about it.
Right.
And I think that is unfortunate and questionable at the same time.
Sure.
So those are some of the things that I'm raising. I'm wondering whether it is an actual physiological case, or if it is a case of a psychological process, you know, that probably we have to deal with at another level. Because some people are actually finding optic nerve damage. They have hypothesized that there's a certain cusp, something begins to change, the shape of the optic nerve begins to change. You have another group of people who are saying, hey, maybe this is not about the optic nerve at all. Maybe this is all about mucus that has gathered over the years in the visual system because of a particular diet, high levels of starch, salt and sugars and oils and those things that build up certain mucus within the human body. How do we explain that? What are the herbalists saying? I have found it very interesting just being here. So, you know, I hope that Dominica begins to, over time, begins to look at those things, because remember, our people are living for 127 years.
Yeah.
Actually, maybe we should use the opportunity to say that we have some of the reportedly one of the oldest women in the world living on
Yes.
Dominica, 127 years old.
Mapampo.
You know, so those processes, there are 23 centenarians alive in Dominica now.
Yes.
And most of them, probably even 80% of them, are probably women. Are women. So it's that kind of thing. But as relates to and some of them have lost their sight, some of them still have their sight. There's one who was voted in as an elder, and she still threads a needle. Isn't that brilliant?
Of course.
So, you know, to be able to see that whole as a designer, you know, you can imagine what it is. But certainly, what I would hope, again, here is another possibility, how can one begin to talk with younger persons
Yes.
about dietary patterns, about lifestyle. A lot of people eat a lot of junk food. They junk a lot.
Absolutely.
Obesity is quite a difficulty. With obesity comes hypertension. You know, and how
And
do
even diabetes.
and diabetes, and then they say that is a predisposition to increase pressure, intraocular pressure in the eyes. So probably how does one like me go out and begin to talk with people about those things? Are schools interested in those things? How do we begin to get those messages across? How can we help? What can we develop? And what can be done to help people, either through art, to dance, to performance? So it's all those possibilities that I'm exploring. And I know I visited some people at the National Association for Visually Handicapped, and they've been helpful in dealing with me. But at another level, how can we begin to spread that message to so many African American people and other people? Because it's prominent among Caucasian people too. You
Yes,
know,
it has a different name to it, but it's,
c'est la même chose, huh?
yeah. The other thing too is that we find that when we were growing up, when you heard of glaucoma or blindness or diabetes or a lot of the other illnesses, we always associated it with the older people. We're at a stage where we're in our 40s, and we're the ones suffering from these things now.
It can happen at any age.
And that's the scary part, and that's the part where I think, yes, we need to get in touch with the younger kids, because who knows, 10 years from now, it may slip an age group.
Yes.
You know, it may even be younger. Look at breast cancer. Before, the screening age, mandatory screening age for breast cancer was for 40. You have 28 years old. Women, 28 years old with breast cancer. 35, double mastectomies. So I don't think there's like an age group per se that is sorely, you know, sadly contracting any of these illnesses. But I think, yes, we need to start educating the younger ones, the teenagers. They're in the formidable years. They're unfortunately more interested in the entertainment aspect of life. But the reality part of it is where people like you come in. It would be great to see you, you know, to have you
It would just
address a group of youth.
It would really
you
be
know.
beautiful just be able to do a series of those across lines, even with wide groups of people, to chat with them about it, tell them what's happening, what they could do. I mean, AIDS is one thing everybody talks a lot about, and I think it's
Right.
important because of the whole sexual thing. But then you have a whole other generation. The thing is, there is a painlessness about this. And if you are born like Stevie Wonder or Ray Charles or people like this, Stevie Wonder, you're born blinded. But if you happen to feel that you get to 25, 30 years or 20 years, suddenly you find your sight is beginning to disturb. You discover this thing. It's frightening, it's frustrating, it's hard, especially when you're thinking, but if one is very strong, and that is the whole business of overcoming,
Yes.
that I think typifies the American spirit.
Yeah,
The business
absolutely.
of overcoming.
For me, I mean, I was in my 20s the first time that I was told I was borderline. So it's not like, okay, my mom's age, where maybe in her 40s or something like that. You know, I had to deal with it.
What is borderline?
Borderline, or another term for it, is suspect.
Oh, I see.
Where
Okay.
you have the tendencies, you have the high eye pressure, you have the loss of some of your peripheral, but it's not quite glaucoma. It hasn't developed into full-blown glaucoma.
There are lots of things to deal with it. obviously needed to be approved by the Federal Drug Administration.
Yes.
And there's quite a bit that is within scope. And if one searches sufficiently, there are support groups that are working, people come and talk. And there are other views too, Eastern views, you know, people from other cultures who have other views on the matter.
Yes.
Some people may think that the eye relates to the liver in Chinese culture, you know.
Right, right.
Some people think the eye is only in and of itself in the head and nowhere else, you know. And what do we do? How do we get people, how do we unite all those philosophies of medicine and healing? Some people think there is no cure for this matter called glaucoma because it runs through the family and it's, you know, so and so. And what do we do about it? Whilst you have those same persons who are saying there is no cure, they are very interested in optic nerve regeneration.
Right.
What's happening? So it is something that I think young persons of African descent, African American descent, Caribbean descent in diaspora, people of color, wherever, even people who are of this part of the world should really look at. And hey, a lot of us are here, we're willing to talk about it. It's just unfortunate when people begin to lose sight if they think that it's running through the family, but certainly it's something of interest.
Yeah. Well, you know what? It's a challenge that any one of us face whenever we are told that we have something, whatever it is, that there's something wrong with our system. It's a great challenge. And it's good to see your disposition. You know, you really have an upbeat disposition about it. And I know, you know, talking with you and following you through for the next few interviews, we're going to see, you know, how you go from here. And certainly someone out there is going to learn from what they see of you. We had touched also on a very delicate topic in the last segment. We had touched on the case study that you did of the islands and the sexual problem that lies therein. And it was truly, truly heart-wrenching and appalling, to say it nicely, of what we read of it and what you've told us of it. I just want to bring back the topic
that back
again.
Yes. It is interesting. For instance, we had, in that particular production, we had 4 cases. There's a tenderness about it because somebody says 1 case of child sexual abuse is 1 case too many.
Absolutely.
You almost wanted to feel that in the production process, half a story of what one child said was sufficient. But of course, we had different cases to present. You have one child who was abused by her stepfather, who had been living with her mother. Her mother was always sickly. She lived with her grandmother, then her mother left and went to the United States. And she was left with the grandmother. The mother came back. The mother had a man living in the house, but the man was the constant provider. And that seems to be generally across the board wherever it occurs.
Yes.
And the mother happens to be out and he pulls daughter in and she gives you the story of the pain and the horror and the
psychological damage.
Inability, the terror of reporting. That was a whole section. They could not report because the perpetrator threatened. If you tell, I will kill. In most cases, they threatened the children with killing, with death. And so that, of course, they overcame. They would take them and put them in special houses, and they would grow and grow. And I remember one girl who I was particularly proud of, who met a boy finally, and she started to talk with him, and they became friends. But at first, a man was a problem for her. There was another one who was, at 12, she was abused by her father, who said that he was the one who mined her, and so, you know, he was the first he should have her virginity. And what I remember about that child is that she was particularly spaced out. She seemed to have had no core. And so those cases are terrible. We had other cases of attempted rape, where you find a little girl, somebody attempted to rape her, and she remained traumatized to the point where I remember she saying, right now, I am afraid to go out. You know, she goes out. And then you have, because they live in communities that are small, let's say you have a community of 552,000 people, sometimes in some cases. That person walks down the street and everybody seems to know it was you.
Exactly.
You see, it was you. So, you know, there is that shame that one has to deal with.
Yep.
And so those were some of the things that I think the Conventions on the Rights of the Child had to, because obviously the people who presented their case to City Hall here when they had that hearing on child prostitution in New York City, they were grouped, a man and a woman actually, don't quite remember their names, but they were working on behalf of the CRC, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and they were presenting these cases, particular reference to Article 19, where the state had a right to protect the child, and Article 42 or 43, where the state had the right to protect the child from child sexual abuse. So it was very interesting. In one of the islands, we had a case of a whole prostitution ring that had broken out. Shocking, but to much of the Caribbean, you know, but you know, it was almost traced to the entertainment and modeling industry. So it's unfortunate that something that brings so much delight and pleasure to the human form and body, i.e. Clothing and design and all those things should terminate in that kind of activity. But that was the case, young people being drawn out to various locations and undressed and asked to pose in provocative positions, what you call that. There's also some other words of the persons involved, and they've been videotaped. Of course, you heard what happened in London with some of the leading rock guitarists who are involved in various types of, you know, luring children onto the internet and having conversations with them. So imagine I could move from an island to the international scope and find similarity in those particular events. So it seems to be right across the board.
Absolutely. It's such a sad thing because it's damaging physically and it's so damaging mentally, you know, and it's such a stigma that that child has to carry. I mean, I'm the mother of a daughter. I mean, the way you have to watch your children now is unbelievable.
According to one of the according to the psychiatrist who participated in the program, she said, every time I think of child abuse, I think of the child.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, something too is that you would think that because incest is on such a rise in the islands that they would instigate some kind of penalty for the perpetrator and also for the people who know about it and do nothing about it.
Actually, there is for the perpetrator, you know. But what happens is, one of the things we discovered in the project, and hope we can show pieces of it at our next, when we have a more extensive interview, is that between the identification of the perpetrator and the police comes in and say, we've charged you with this particular, and the court hearing, there is some dealing that goes on. In one of the islands, we know of cases where I remember one of the most brutal cases where the girl was made to say no, that this report that she made, this thing never happened. There are cases where the mother actually was paid $600, you know, which is about 200 and something US dollars, to tell her daughter to forget the story. And the legislation at the time, although it covered matters dealing with protection of the child against forms of abuse, it did not include that particular clause that says if the mother knows that this is going on and does not report it, she should be charged. Another very interesting thing, a 13-year-old girl anywhere in the world, any child who's under 18 according to the Conventions of the Rights of the Child, appears at a hospital pregnant. This is a crime. You have before you evidence of a crime. Now, what is the protocol? Who says, well, from the time we've identified it here, what do we do about it? So those are some of the very interesting things that are coming out. I mean, and those were some of the findings that we made, and hopefully it would shed some light on some of the things, because I think people are going to say, boy, I didn't know this was really happening, but really, it is going on. And hopefully that kind of work we can be able to do and continue to do that kind of work. Not so much, probably not in sexual abuse so much because, you know, but look at teenagers, speak with them, have conversations with them, determine, you know, talk about other things.
Other things.
It's not, you know, I don't know, probably we come out of a different island heritage, but it's not sex alone we want to talk about, you know.
I think too it's the age group, because the younger ones seems that's what they want to talk about. Whereas I think when we were in that age group, we were not that much into it. You know, we were more into, fortunately for us, I guess, we were more into the whole political thing in the 70s.
Yes.
You know, this is the 70s for the teenagers
Yes,
right now.
it is.
So we're the ones who have to make the changes.
Yeah, yeah.
Steinberg, we can go on, and I know this is just the tip of the iceberg. We're going to have a few more discussions with you, and we're going to follow you through some of your experiences here in New York. If you'd like to get in touch with him, if you'd like more information on any of the topics that you've seen, you can get in touch with us. Mocha Productions, it's 718-527-0559. You can also email us. The email will show on the bottom of your screen there. And Mr. Henry,
if they wanted to get in touch with me direct, it would be 718-525-1942.
Okay.
And probably through you, some email works. You know,
Absolutely.
we could get it. And probably we could put a little subscript somewhere that may be running, you know, saying exactly where those little things, but always a pleasure.
Absolutely,
I mean, it's really nice chatting with you.
absolutely. We look forward to a lot more discussion with Steinberg, and bearing in mind, whatever you see and hear are our expressions, you know, right here, not that of the television studio that you see it at. But the topics that we like to pull are topics that kind of tie into the name of the program, which is Solutions.
Solutions, yeah.
You wanting to reach out to the kids out there, however we can help in bringing your topics to the forefront, we will. You chronicling the journey that you're going through right now, because this is just another leg of your journey, you know, the medical experience, you know,
and
we'll
just being in New York too. I mean, you know, to actually see people very frustrated with the snow and to realize that the snow is taking its own time to melt.
Absolutely, absolutely. And just think of it, you know, we think that our burden is so grand, you know, and then they complain about the snow.
I know.
It didn't snow enough last year because people bought new snow shovels, didn't get to use them. This year it snowed, and it snowed too much.
After you lived in Canada for 5 years, you understand
you just
the horror
don't
of
know.
cold.
You
But
just don't
it's
know.
very interesting.
Yeah, but there are a couple other topics that we will bring up at a later stage, and you know, just going back to some of your old radio. You know, some of your old radio shows is something that we're going to do.
Yeah, probably. I think that would be interesting.
Absolutely.
Because we would need to look at, for instance, I listen to a lot of talk radio here. We'd probably need to look at, you know, some of the differences, the music, the music selected. And
so, sorry to cut you off, but, you know, stay tuned, and thank you for watching. We hope you've enjoyed what you've seen in the first 2 segments, and please join us for the next few segments as we follow Mr. Henry through his journey through New York right here now. Thank you again, and have a good evening. Thank you, Steinberg.
My pleasure.
Okay. There's so much to discuss. There's so many topics, and each